Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to begin by remarking how much I enjoyed doing the previous episode, my previous sharing. It was the first time that I had addressed the novice, the person considering not being quite sure where to begin in their spiritual inquiry. And it was, as I said, quite enjoyable and long overdue, if I might add, project. But I would be remiss to not offer a correction for a misspeak. I mentioned among Wayne Dyer and another very important, in the same genre, kind of a self-help in the beginning, but crossed over to the spiritual plane when either professionally or personally they decided that they would be remiss to only focus on the so-called success aimed at increasing wealth of the self-improvement movement. But another guy mentioned Stuart Wilde is his correct name. Well worth your time to search him out. Wilde. Fantastic, and he has a lot of really good recordings out there, YouTubes, even though he's since passed. His work was relevant to me, very important to me, and I suggest that those of you that have the time or interest feel well worth checking him out. And the reason I've dedicated the first 2 minutes of today's sharing to Stuart Wilde is that he started a process for me. He talked about sideways. And it kind of flew over my head when I first was introduced to this kind of concept. That dimensions to the side may hold or do hold lots of realms well worth thought and consideration. I'd always been on the vertical and the horizontal. On either of these XY axes, you can imagine the future, remember the past, look to the future, go to the past, consider the past. It's on this plane. But Stuart urged me and all of us to pay attention to sideways, the direction of sideways. And all I can do is point like this. And I'll begin on the XY axis again. But sideways is three-dimensional, the circumference of a circle. And this became more interesting enough to revisit here when I had a epiphany yesterday afternoon, eyes wide open. And after it happened, it seemed so obvious that I wasn't quite sure why I hadn't considered it before, why I hadn't recognized it before. But it always comes back to that axiom that, too, when I need to know, I will know. And perhaps until yesterday, until I went through the activity, I think the activity again of introducing the first steps was truly amazing to me, and on many levels, as it turns out. So as I talked about the path, stepping stones, and how that the progression from not even seeing anything to taking a step, that first step, the second leap of faith. First leap of faith is jumping off the cliff into the abyss. The second leap of faith is taking that first step, not, at least for me, not really knowing what my foot would rest upon. But again, it's trust. Trust in the system. Trust in yourself. So, by magic, the stepping stone appeared just as my foot was making contact. And the process of beginning the next step, as Christmas Humphrey said, walk on. The next step, and again, it came to fruition just as I was making contact. There it was, at least, I'm sure it was there previously, but couldn't see it. And as I began to make a habit, making a habit again into a hobby, something that was entertaining and fun and worthwhile to me, steps would gradually manifest. And the further I walked, the further I began to learn how to see. So that this progressive path to the stars and beyond, was visually available to me until it went so far that I'd have to wait till I progressed some steps to see more. But what happened yesterday after sharing about beginnings, revisiting something that was perhaps neglected a bit in my past, the importance of it had sort of paled in the face of the accumulation of days and steps after the first. So now I would look and see this path. And I always understood, and I've always been sure to comment that we each have our own path. But what happened on my path made me appreciate what had happened yesterday afternoon, after reflecting on the episode that I had just completed, it was as if a light came on and my peripheral view not only widened, but expanded. What I experienced was pebbles on an infinite beach. And before, where I had connected my pebbles, where I had tunnel visioned my pebbles into the steps of my journey, now my path became indistinguishable from all the other pebbles on this beach, this infinite beach. I could see nothing but pebbles. And it was through the plane of sideways. I got off my XY axis and accessed the wheel, got off the two diameters to journey on the circumference of the circle. And there was this incredible, incalculable amount of stones or pebbles where I had previously experienced in a linear fashion. And what this was is the infinite amount of paths available to each of us. I guess at one stage of growth it was necessary for me to focus on my personal path. But my personal path has become of increasingly lesser importance to me as I've been expanding and embracing the whole. And this is all part of the journey of acceptance of ordinariness, the death throes of any sense of extraordinary. My path, as if it belonged to me. Isn't it quite the other way around? Don't I belong to it? But this overwhelming, one of those rare moments where I experience bliss, and I mentioned before, bliss is a condition for me that is best kept fleeting. Because I just don't know how to really incorporate perpetual bliss in as long as I'm in this physical form. Perhaps there's a way, but I'm more interested in, at this point, still engaging the world. And it seems to me, in that state of bliss, engagement would be the least attractive and the last thing on your list. This is when you become free of engagement. This is the process of leaving the physical form. Eventually, you'll have to, because you lose interest in sustenance of the body. As everything pales in the overwhelmingness of bliss. But I did experience this momentarily when the light came on, the sun came out, and illuminated all, or as many of them as I'm able to imagine. And it seems that I no longer could see my path, my personal path had become universal, where one random step in any direction was just as meaningful as any other. And this is the beauty of sideways. I have to continue on the circumference of this circle, but as everything else is expanding. So my journey for any possible circumnavigation becomes less and less possible. And when you feel this circle, as you follow the circle, you start to twist again sideways. And this sideways twisting of the circular is the spiral. I had always thought that the circle was the most important symbolic entity, but now I experience that the spiral and is certainly within the realm of possibilities that there is yet undiscovered symbols that will make my spiral pale in comparison. Now, what came to mind when I'm thinking on this large scale is, what is a cosmic year? How long does it take our sun to circumnavigate the center, the black hole, or holes, maybe it's a duality, of the center of the Milky Way galaxy? One revolution of our Earth is a day. One revolution of our sun is what we call a year. So how about on a cosmic scale? The Earth circling its center point, and we call it a cosmic year. And when I researched it, it's anywhere from 225 million years, Earth years, to 250 million Earth years. And what always happens as I expand into the macro view, the macro scope, perhaps, in comparison to the microscope, the realm of the infinitely large compared to the infinitely small. And without fail, whenever I'm in the throes, thinking in terms of cosmic years, and of course the Milky Way will rotate around another center, its center, and then the years. I don't know about you, but 225 million to 250 million is already well beyond the scope of my imagination as to what that number really truly means. But always as I expand and I'm looking through the macro scope, I collapse in on the infinitely small. I start thinking about things like the Planck constant, the smallest measurement possible. And in the small is as the large. But for some reason, my mind it's easier to entertain looking through a microscope. And I've read a lot about M theory. And M theory is quantum physics, and the M stands for magic or myth, so I'm told. And what's magic about the M theory, the super string theory, supra string theory, as it's also known, is that it addresses perhaps the biggest conundrum of classical physics. We talk about in classical physics the four major forces: gravity, two kinds of nuclear, lesser and weaker, and electromagnetic. And in the theory of traditional classical physics, the physics of much later of last century, was that these forces should be equal. And gravity was always problematic because we can defeat the force of gravity so easily. It seems to be much weaker than electromagnetic or lesser and greater nuclear force. But here's where sideways becomes so interesting. In quantum physics, they talk about brain. And they talk this B-R-A-N-E, and they talk about brain worlds, which they liken to the pages of a book. Each book, each page, the printing has been applied to that page, not to be changed. And it's different than the page preceding or afterwards. It's different. If it's a book that makes any sense, unless it's repeating itself, unless it's some kind of typing practice. But books together combine into a book. The pages together, all told, amount to a book, beginning, middle, and end. But here's what's important. The printed word can be likened to our world. What's printed on our world is all that we can know. And we take this as reality. It's kind of a shared covenant. We implicitly agree to what our senses perceive as real, just as the printed words on a page. But the next page has a completely different set of words, meaning that each page could be another reality. And another way that I like that they talk about is carpets. The pattern on a carpet is woven into the carpet, much as the words are printed on the page, except that the paper for a book is not created with the words on it. They're added later. But a carpet is created with the pattern on it. Can't change that pattern. But what happens if you stack a lot of carpets on top of each other? Just as my analogy of the book with different words on each page again. Now, if you imagine a worm from a page, a bookworm, and not the person, but the little critter that's known to love paper. Now they burrow right through to the next page, perpendicular. Okay, so here's where the analogy leads us. The brain world is as a page in a book or one of our carpets. Now, if you can imagine brain stacked up just as we have in a book and our stack of carpets with something penetrating perpendicular to the next brain world, which can be thought of as a dimension. Okay, we always talk about every 9, 11, 13, the idea of dimensions, and particularly to address the conundrum of apparent weakness of gravity. Now, gravitons, perpendicular, penetrate to the next brain world. So, on our page, on our carpet, gravity seems weak. But if we picture that gravity through gravitons is going perpendicular to our world, this would account for a lot of the forces that seem to be the weakness of gravity, because gravity is connecting the different dimensions. It's acting in the different dimensions. And as far as we can speculate, as far as our theories go, it's the only thing that's currently able to bridge the brain worlds. And if gravity can do it, one of the 4 fundamental forces, who or what's to say that we won't be able, we will be able to transfer from one dimension to another in a waking state? Because I have pretty strong suspicions that we do this in the dream, in our light body, that we're not relegated to our one single brain world. So here we've come to micro, Planck constant. Nothing is able to be measured that's smaller than this number, whatever this number might be, whatever this size is. But can't you suspect where I'm going next? We went from cosmic to microcosmic, and as I look at these things, as I consider string theory, M theory, as I consider what I'm able to get and glean from my limited understanding of quantum physics, what's important here is in the time it takes my heart to beat or to take a breath, I'm already back at the macro level. And just as we breathe in and we breathe out, so too am I able to go from imaginable largeness to unimaginable smallness. Here again, even though the micro was easier to focus on, the idea of infinitely small is more difficult to grasp for me than infinitely large. But what's important here is the act of breathing in and breathing out, of the blood going from the lungs to the heart, to our head, to our body, to our limbs. Truly to be enveloped in the cosmic reality. I don't know about you, but it makes me happy to do so.